All right. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to another wonderful lecture topic in our Intro to Psychology course. Today, topic 3, we're going to be talking about memory. Our goals for the unit today. First of all, I want you to understand how memories are formed, understand what memories are and how they end up in our brains, understand the different parts of memory and the different types of memory, and then understand how memories exist in our brain or how they also go away. First of all, we're just going to focus on what memory is. So our definition, standard textbook definition of memory is the retention of information over time. So it's just retaining information, which information can mean a wide variety of things that we're going to talk about in a little bit. It can be a process, a skill, how to do something, events, facts, all kinds of things. Now, a couple things I want you to keep in mind as we go. Memory is not a single ability. There are different types of memories. There are different processes that go into memory. Um, Forming memory is not a one-step process. Second of all, it's constructive. It's a constructive process. There are steps involved that build on one another. And lastly, it's subjective. Your memory and my memory and everybody's memories act differently, okay? Because what we deem as important in our lives, or based on how we live our lives, our memories are going to function differently. Essentially, memory is a three-step process. So anytime we talk about memory, we're talking about three things that actually occur. The first step is encoding. The second step is storage. And the last step is retrieval. So we get the information, we process it, we keep that information, and then we retrieve the information when we need it. And really, in terms of our lesson for today, all we're going to be talking about, so now that we understand this, the three-step process, all we're going to be talking about is what's actually occurring during these three steps, and also the different nuances and the different concepts held under each one of those headings. So first of all, we are going to talk about encoding. So encoding is the first step in the process. Back to our analogies, I'll use a computer. I like to use the computer analogy for anytime we talk about memory. I would say encoding is like the keyboard. It's the keyboard of the computer. It's what takes the information, it puts it in a form that our computer finds acceptable. So I mean, our computers don't speak in English language or, French or Spanish or anything. They have their own computer language. And what the keyboard does is when we press the keys to put it into our human language, it transfers into a computer language that your computer will understand. And really, our brains work the same way. It encodes our memories. It puts it into our brains in a way that our brains can understand. So encoding is how the info gets into our memory. And there's two important concepts that we need to learn along with encoding. First of all is rehearsal. Okay, rehearsal is essentially repetition. Okay, the more times that you repeat something, whether it be a skill or knowledge, the more likely it will be strongly encoded into your memory. For those of you that have tried this in school, it's called studying. You take your notes home, you just go over them time after time. In fact, I know you people that have learned Spanish, you've gotten really good at rehearsing for quizzes. And funny enough, we'll be able to probably talk a little bit today about why some of you, as soon as you write those things on your test, then seem to instantly forget them right afterwards. So rehearsal. Second is mnemonic devices. A mnemonic device is a strategies for improving our memory. So things that we do to help us improve our memory through encoding ideas in specific ways. For instance, some of the ones you might be familiar with, Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally is a mnemonic device. It's the order of operations in math. It stands for parentheses, exponents, I forget, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, I think. Check with Mr. Volk, but I'm pretty sure that's what it stands for. Roy G. Biv is another one. ROYGBIV is the color spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, something, violet. Maybe there's no I. And then lastly, for those of you that ever played the piano, you read music through Every Good Boy Does Fine. And George Buys Daisies for Alice. They represent the lines and the spaces in the staff. So just things that we do, ways that we remember certain things. Second step in the process is storage. Storage is the retention of memory, or the keeping of memory. And within storage, really, we talk about memory as a three-step process with encoding and then storage and then retrieval. Really, within storage itself, we have a three-step process as well. And it goes through any kind of storage process. In terms of our memory, it goes through a three-step process in its own. It goes actually through three different types of memory, depending on how important that skill or memory is, and also how long we feel we need to hold on to that information. So the first type of memory, the first step in the storage process is the sensory memory. And what the sensory memory does is it holds exact replicas of anything we see, hear, do for a short period of time, really only about 2 seconds. So really this memory has an extremely large capacity for a very short time. So really what you're doing here is think about it as you walk throughout the hallways, or think about it, if you're walking through a mall. I mean, your brain or your eyes are seeing an astronomically large amount of data or different things. There's no way you'd ever want to remember all of that information, everything that you saw as you walked around the mall. So what your sensory memory does is basically it holds on to things for a short period of time, enough to give your brain time to determine whether or not those things are something you actually even want. So I mean, it kind of is your filter in a sense. It's a filter for memories, because if you walked around and tried to devote everything to memory that you saw, or your brain devoted everything to memory that you saw, your memory would get pretty full pretty fast. In our analogy, I say our storage is like our RAM in our computer. It's where all the memory is kept. It's where all of our data files are kept. So there you go. That's our analogy there. In terms of sensory memory, getting back to that, there are people actually who do have faulty sensory memories, and they do remember everything. They're called iconic or echoic memories. They either remember visually everything that happened, or some people even remember, in terms of sensory information, everything about every event they experience, which, when you think about it, can be kind of traumatizing. You don't want to remember everything. There are a lot of bad things that we experience in our lives. It's better to just remember the good things, which generally, that's why memory is subjective. We tend to remember mostly the good things. All right. Assuming that a memory makes it through the sensory memory, and we deem, we should probably remember this for a little bit, it goes into our short-term memory, which is our working memory. Okay, it's called our working memory. It's the memory that we use for thinking and reasoning. So we keep this information for a short time. Let's say you're watching some kind of video or movie or something. A movie is probably a good example. In order to make sense of the whole movie, you need to remember what happened from beginning to end. So there's a lot of details you remember as you're watching a movie that, hours later, or a couple of years later, you never remember all that stuff about the movie, but you need to remember it in the short term for thinking and reasoning, or even things we read. If I had you read something as a class, say an article, you'd remember a lot of details because you're going to need that to think and you're going to need that to reason and discuss. But later you're going to forget that anyways. A couple concept things that we need to talk about under short-term memory. A rehearsal loop. A rehearsal loop is the amount of information uh, that we can rehearse in 2 seconds. Um, Commonly, I always think of the telephone number example where you hear somebody tells you a telephone number and you repeat it as fast as you can a couple times to try and remember it. Another good example of how we improve our short-term memory is by chunking. We arrange things in easily remembered patterns. I know I do an example with my class with the one bun, two shoe method of remembering grocery lists. Another good example of what this is here. Well, if you put up a picture of just all these dots and you showed it to somebody for 2 seconds, they might have no idea. And you said, okay, so how many dots were there? Well, they might not be able to tell you. However, oh, I don't want that together. If you showed them this picture and said, okay, how many dots are there? They could probably be able to tell you because it's chunked together. It's three groups of three. It's an easily remembered pattern. All three groups of three, I have 9. That's how many I have. All right, moving on. So you have something in your sensory memory. It's important enough that your brain determines, you know what, I should remember this for a period of time. Maybe rehearse it a little bit. Through chunking, maybe you're able to remember it a little bit longer. But then after the fact, after you've thought about it, you've used it to reason, your brain determines, no, this is something that we need to remember. This is something I need to remember for a long period of time. Something that I'm going to want to recall for many years to come. So our long-term memory is a relatively permanent memory. It's where we store most of the most important skills that we have, the most important events, facts, procedural knowledge. It's a very large capacity. Our brain has a very large capacity for memory. Depending on the person, obviously that will differ, but in general, our brains can remember an extraordinarily large amount of information. Within our long-term memory, there's 3 different types of memory. I'll get this figured out. You don't worry. All right, there are 3 different types of long-term memory. The first of all is called episodic memory, and the best way I can explain this is kind of like episodes of a TV show. So this is the type of memory that remembers events with a specific time, place, or people. Okay, so these are specific events. You have good family holidays or family events that you remember, or I guess even in some instances bad events that you remember. But it's very specific events that you remember about. I was here. This is when it was. This is what happened. Those are the people that were here. Um, so that's episodic. Semantic is going to be our knowledge of the world. And so in semantic, we're talking about things like a lot of times schemas that we have, like a table, for instance. You guys walk into a room, and if somebody said, sit by the table, and there's one table, you would understand that a table is a table. You understand what a desk is. You understand what a computer is. You understand all these basic things that help you function in the world. They help you develop your worldview. If somebody said go to this street, you understand what a street is, you understand what a car is. It's all these basic basic knowledge points that help you function in the world. And lastly, procedural knowledge is how to do things. How to do things. If you think about it, you get up every morning. You probably take a shower, many of you. And every morning when you wake up, you don't need to go and ask somebody to teach you how to take a shower. You understand how to take a shower. Okay, you understand how to turn on your shower. You understand the process. Okay, that is all something. I mean, it's not something generally when you think about memories. You don't think about skills and things that I have to remember how to do. Or if you're making something, you know how to turn on the oven. You know how to use the microwave. All these things are stored in your procedural memory. All these things are items that you have to remember how to do. All right. Last but not least, we're going to talk about retrieval. Retrieval is defined as the recovery of previously stored memories. Okay, so over time you have these memories, they're stored, and then eventually there's going to come a time where you want to retrieve those memories. And within retrieval, there's a lot of different ways that this retrieval takes place. The most common has to do with either recall or recognition. God darn, I'm just having so many problems with these erasers today. There we go. So first of all, we have recall. It's memory recovered without a stimulus. So um, when I say stimulus, what I mean is hint. You can retrieve that without having to be prompted. If I asked you, what was what is my birthday, and you gave me the answer, that'd be an example of recall. The opposite, or rather the counterpart of retrieval of recall is recognition, where you match a stimulus to a stored memory. So, for instance, you see something, and all of a sudden it triggers a memory in your brain. The most common ways in which you guys see this is through a lot of the tests you take in school. For instance, a multiple choice test would be a test totally based on recognition. You would read the question, you'd see your four answers. One of those four answers would hopefully trigger a memory for you. Oh yeah, now I remember, this is what I read, this is what I studied, this is the answer. Versus recall, when it's just the question and you have to give a free response answer. So really the difference between recall and recall and recognition is the difference on a test between somebody just giving you a question and you having to write the answer, or recognition being like a multiple choice type thing. There's also a couple other concepts to talk about within retrieval. First of all, the primary recency effect. Um, Researchers have shown that generally we remember the beginning and the ends of lists or sequences better than we do the things in the middle. So when we retrieve things, for instance, you're at the grocery store, you had a list of things. Mom gave you a list of 5 things. Oh man, I remember the first one, I remember the last one, I don't remember the middle ones. Another concept is mood or state dependent retrieval. This happens a lot where you're in a general mood, or you're very sad, or you're maybe very happy, and you get a memory while you're in that mood or that state of mind. By state of mind, I mean like if somebody is high, or they're drunk, or they're in some other state of consciousness other than alert and sober. A lot of times you cannot recall these memories unless you are in that mood, that state, or even that location. This happened to me frequently when I was in college. So went to school at Lawrence University in Appleton. Lawrence University has a very prideful, what they call their honor code. So anytime you would take a test, you didn't actually take the test, or the final, I guess. It was mainly the final. So when you take the final for a class, you did not have to take the final in the classroom. You could go literally anywhere on campus and take that test. And, generally speaking, my freshman year, I'd study. I had a spot in the library. I always studied. I loved studying there. It was alone. It was away from everybody, and so I enjoyed doing that. Um, but when it came time to the test, I always just wanted to be in my room. I'd lock myself in my room, wanted to be away from everybody, wanted to be at my desk, and I'd take the test. And for my freshman year, I noticed that I wasn't testing very well, and I was kind of confused about that because I always felt like I was doing really good. And so, in one of my psychology classes, this was brought up, and a light bulb went off. Oh, well, I need to be trying that. I need to be, when I go take my test, I need to go back to that spot where I always study and take that test. And sure enough, as soon as I started doing that, if I'd go up to that fourth floor corner where I always studied and I'd take that test, oh man, it just made such a big difference, and you just remember everything so much easier. Smells do that a lot too. Where if mom had a certain smell whenever she was cooking your favorite dish. All of a sudden, you walk in somewhere and you smell that. And even if you're not at home and you remember those kinds of things, um, so whatever type of mood or whatever type of state you're in when a memory is formed, sometimes those moods or states need to come back before a memory can be retrieved. And then lastly, um, I don't know if we'd consider this a part of retrieval, actually the absence of retrieval, but that is forgetting. So forgetting is the loss of accessibility to previously stored memories. There are a lot of theories regarding how we forget, and actually, a lot of them are true for most of us. So the last thing I'm going to do today is just go over a couple of these theories regarding um, how we forget. So first theory is decay theory. Essentially, what that says is without maintenance, without rehearsal, if we don't put time into remembering something, um, it goes away. The memory goes away. So just as we get older, if we're not constantly rehearsing these things and remembering them, those kinds of things go away. The second is interference, where other information gets in the way, or other memories get in the way. There are two types of ways that this happens. First of all, is proactive interference, where old gets in the way of new information. The most common example of this is every year when the calendar turns to the new year on January 1st, for a period of time, it is hard for all of us to remember what the correct year is, and I know for some of us it's weeks before, 2012 turns to 2013. For weeks we're still right in 2012 because our memory is that, it's 2012. Okay, and for a couple weeks we have to be reminded, and we keep remembering. Then all of a sudden, okay, now we remember. But then the same thing happens next year. Retroactive interference is just the opposite then, where new information gets in the way of old information. A lot of times this happens with addresses or phone numbers, or somebody has a phone number for a long time and then they get a new one and they all of a sudden can't remember their old one. Likewise, that can happen proactively as well, where you get a new one and for a time you only remember your old one. And then lastly, repression, where the motivation to store that memory goes away. I think honestly that's kind of where we're at with some of our Spanish quizzes. You guys rehearse and you rehearse and you rehearse, and you see a lot of value in it because you see the value in doing well on the quiz rather than seeing the value in learning the content. Which, if you would just tell yourself, convince yourself, there's value in the content instead of just doing well on the test, I think many of us would remember some of these a lot more. But nonetheless, we see that as soon as motivation to remain or to store a memory goes away, the ability to retrieve it goes away as well, and we call that repression. All right. So that's it. That's it for memory. A pretty straightforward process. I know in college psych you're going to go a lot more in depth to some of the nuances in terms of how that happens and what happens, especially in terms of things like the episodes and some of those different more detailed types of memories. But for the most part, this is the base. This is the broad overview. This is the process. So for the test, I want you to be able to explain the process that memories take to form. I want you to be able to identify the different types of memory storage and their purpose. And I want you to be able to explain all the ways that we enhance or improve, or maybe can enhance and can improve our memories. All right, as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to help. Otherwise, as soon as you are ready to take this test, you just let me know. We'll set up the time, and we will get done with that and move on to the next topic. All right, have a good day. Bye.